who has entitled her presentation, Rebalancing the Safety Triangle. Since Heinrich produced his safety triangle in 1931, there's been a general belief that it's possible to avoid major injuries or accidents by preventing minor ones. However, the causes of injury frequency are not the same as the causes of injury severity. Lynn will discuss the thought of what we focus on efforts, not only on those incidents that statistically are more likely to occur in the workplace, but indeed successfully reduce those incidents. Lynn will discuss how this general belief came to be and address some of the difficulties that we may face to rebalance the safety policy within the organisation. So I'd like to... before I actually hand over to Lynn, can I ask you, if you do have any questions, if you can leave your questions to the end, and then we'll hand over the microphone, wait for the microphone to actually get to you, so that the other delegates within the room can actually hear the question. All that said, I'd like to give a warm welcome to Lynn. Please do.
Thank you very much. Right, see if we can make the IT work. I rather cheekily retitled my presentation. Our safety record in the UK is enviable, I would say. Per head of population, I think we're one of the safest countries in the world, and that's a really, really good thing. But I'm slightly concerned that some of the policies that we're making now are making the future less safe and not more safe. We're no longer making wide swathes of changes, we're making little tweaks. And we're hoping that each of these little tweaks will make things more safe. But my concern is that they're not. And one of the reasons for that concern starts with Heinrich's triangle. I'm quite sure many of you will be aware of Heinrich's triangle. Heinrich came up with it in the 1930s, and since then it has evolved, and it's been revised many times over the years. But the basic gist of Heinrich's triangle and all its revisions have remained the same. The idea is that for every 300 or so near misses or close calls, there will be 29 non-serious injuries or minor injuries, and for those there will be one serious injury or fatality. And Heinrich's triangle is deceptively simple. It's a really easy one to remember. The pyramid shape makes it nice and easy to remember, and it feels very intuitively correct. It feels that, yes, for every 300 or so near misses, there may well be 29 non-serious injuries or minor injuries, and there may well tragically be one fatality. The trouble with Heinrich's triangle and its deceptive simplicity is that it's letting us down. It's playing on our intuition, and our intuition is letting us down. Heinrich's triangle is a ratio of, and it shows the frequency of injuries. But what Heinrich's triangle doesn't show us is that there is no link between frequency of injuries and severity of injuries. And so what I'm going to talk to you about today is questioning our assumptions, questioning our intuition, and trying to figure out if we're making things more safe or less safe. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself. In my everyday life, I practice behavioural science. My company teach people how to use behavioural science to make things more safe, to have better leadership, to make things more efficient, better quality, that kind of thing. And some of you may well have met behavioural science in the field of safety in the form of behavioural-based safety. Has anyone heard of BBS? Yeah, a few nods in the audience, thank you. I'm not today going to talk about BBS or behavioural-based safety. Behavioural-based safety is one of the tools in the box of behavioural scientists, but it is a very specific tool and it does a very specific job. And the area of behavioural science that I like to look at is more broad, and I like to apply it to more things than just safety. Behavioural science has been around for many years. It's a branch of psychology. But it's not psychology. Psychologists are interested in what's going on inside your head. They're interested in your thoughts and in your feelings. And harsh as it may sound, I don't care about your thoughts and your feelings. Behavioural science focuses on your behaviours, and very specifically, your behaviours are what you say and what you do. It's what I can see and hear and observe. Behavioural science is all about objectivity. And I can't judge you what's going on inside your head because I can't see it and I can't hear it. All I can do is look at what you say and what you do. Our behaviours are strongly dependent on three things. They're dependent on our DNA, what we're born with. And we can't change that. Our behaviours are also dependent on our past history. And while we can spend many hours on the couch with a psychologist, we can't really change our past history either, our consequence history we call it. It's all the moments that have led you to be here sitting down today. But there is one thing that we can change of our behaviour, and that's the environment. In behavioural science, the environment is the room that we're in. So this is our environment here today, and it's the room that we're in along with the people who are in it and the behaviours of the people. So if I'd been sneaky and come in here and taken all the chairs away before you'd come in, your behaviours would be different. You wouldn't be sitting here. You'd perhaps be standing or maybe going to fetch a chair. And if I were to walk up and down the room, you would follow where I was. I would hope you would follow me with your eyes when I was walking, and that I would be able to change your behaviour using my own behaviour. The environment is incredibly powerful, and it is the only thing that we have the power to change as well. We can't change our DNA, we can't change our past history, but we can change the environment. And we can change the environment for ourselves and the environment for those around us as well. So, as a little thought experiment for me, can you imagine for me that you are on the beach and you're there with your very best friend in the whole world? What are you thinking about? What are you talking about with your friend? And what are you doing? Most people are having a beer when I ask this question. And the things you're talking about are fun things. You're talking about what you might have for dinner that night, or you're talking about how you went fishing earlier that day, that kind of thing. And now transport yourself and that very same person to a cathedral and there's a wedding going on. Now think about what you're wearing. Are you still wearing the old budgie smugglers? Probably not. And you're probably not talking unless you're the ones down the front conducting the ceremony or saying I do as well. You're perhaps sitting quietly and listening instead. And again, the same two people, take them to a boardroom or to a sports match. And the conversation changes, your behaviours change, even though the same people are in the room, depending on the environment that you're in. And the fun thing to do is then that your grandmother walks in while you're at the sports match. The language is very colourful. And your grandmother walks in and your behaviours change again because someone different has walked into the room. The power of changing the environment is often underestimated, I would say. So, science helps us to predict things. It's the power of the scientific method and science that means that we can build wonderful bridges and that they'll stay up. And that we can dig tunnels and that they won't collapse. And that we can take drugs that were manufactured anywhere in the entire world and we can be as confident as we possibly can be that they're going to do what we think they're going to do and not anything else. Science makes things predictable. Behavioural science makes behaviours predictable. And a lot of people get very sceptical at this stage in the proceedings, and they think, well, behaviours aren't that predictable. People do all sorts of weird and wonderful things. But I'm going to tell you a story about this little old lady, and we'll see how easy it is to try and predict the behaviours. So imagine for me that you are a worker and that you have been tasked by your supervisor to drive to this little old lady's house and help fix her gas. And it's a Friday afternoon, it's about 1 o'clock on a Friday afternoon when you arrive at the house. And the little old lady is, oh, I'm so glad you're here, it's really lovely to see you, come on in, take a wee look, here's the gas and it's not working. And you look and you realise that in order to fix the gas you have to drill a hole in the wall. And you think, no problem at all, I checked my tools before I left and the box with the drill in, that was there, that was fine. So out you go to your car and you pull out the box with the drill in and you open the box and it's not the drill you expected. I am assured that the drill you were expecting was a drill with a clutch that will not snag in the wall or will stop if it does snag. But what you actually find is a clutchless drill. It's an old drill and it's the only option you have. So you think, okay, well I could drive back to the office and get the right drill, but it's a Friday afternoon, it's going to take me a couple of hours to get there through the rush hour traffic. I might not get back in time, I've got to pick the kids up from school, and yeah, is it worth it? And then you think, okay, well, I've used this drill any number of times at home and it's never caused me an issue. And I've heard about all the other guys using these drills as well, it's never caused anyone an issue that I've actually met. And you think, but I know that the work don't want me using this drill. They've sent safety alerts left and right saying don't use this drill. And then the little old lady's there, she's really excited because you're going to fix her gas. And on the road in, you heard on the radio it was going to be a cold snap this weekend, and you think, I don't think I can walk away from this wee old lady, she's going to be absolutely gutted if I can't fix it over the weekend. I'm going to have to try it. And the balance of probabilities is that you're going to try it. This man's behaviour was predictable. The pros for trying it are that you're going to drill a hole in the wall, as far as you can tell, incredibly safely. There's no reason in your entire past history and all the past histories of the people you've met to think that anything will go wrong. And the things that will go right are that the lady will be happy, your boss will be happy because you've made the customer happy. You won't have to go back and do it again on Monday, so you'll be able to fit in more work. That's definitely a good thing. So that there are so many pros to drilling a hole even though you know the tool isn't right. And it's so unlikely that something's going to go wrong. The behaviour that this man is going to use the drill is predictable, no matter how many safety alerts went out. In this case, he did use the drill and it did snag and he ended up in A&E. But it wasn't his fault because everything in his environment was aligned that he was going to use that drill. And there were some things that could have prevented this happening. And I will talk about some of them today. But the main thing that could have prevented this injury occurring is the guy's supervisor taking the time every so often, once a week, twice a week, frequently enough that it was clear to everybody in the gang that if the supervisor asked, has everyone checked their tools have been replaced? You guys have just come back from a job, have you put the tools back where they should be? Brilliant, cheers guys. Frequently enough that it was clear to everyone that it was really important to the supervisor that the tools were in the right places at the end of the job and before you went out for a job. And there are a few things that certainly wouldn't have worked to try and prevent an injury like this. One of them is the one I'm pretty sure a lot of you might be thinking about, is a safety alert or a mass email telling people that they shouldn't be using these drills. Another thing that wouldn't have worked to prevent this incident are signs and notices telling people what's going on. And a third thing that wouldn't have prevented this happening is a disciplinary. I'm going to go through these one by one and explain to you a little bit more why it is that these wouldn't have worked. A mass email wouldn't have worked because while you might think that it will increase awareness that there's a problem, it will make the man aware that there are clutchless drills out there, there are dangerous tools, and that he should not be using them. It will make everyone aware. But I'm going for a bit of audience participation at this stage. Can I ask you all please to raise your hands for me if you know the speed limit on the nearest major road to your house? Do you know what it is? That's great. Keep your hands up for me. Can you tell me please if you're a driver, if you have never ever exceeded that speed limit? Not once in your entire life, not even a mile an hour. I think mostly admirable honesty. Awareness is not enough to drive our behaviour. It never is. It will drive our behaviour a lot of the time. But on the balance of probabilities, when you have to make a decision about doing something that is safe every single time, you cannot rely on awareness to drive people's behaviours. What will drive someone's behaviour is what behavioural scientists call consequences. And consequences as a bit of language is difficult for most people to get because we have a past history of using consequences in a negative sense, as in there will be consequences for your actions. But in behavioural science, consequences are simply the result of behaviours. Consequences are what makes a behaviour more likely to happen again in the future or less likely to happen again in the future. There is no value judgment with the word. And so consequences are much more likely to drive your behaviour. And I'll come back to that in a moment. Another thing that would not have helped, would not have prevented this injury, are signs on the wall. Now, for me, I invariably find signs on a wall fairly patronising. I might be unusual in that, but I hate seeing a sign that tells me to hold on to a handrail. I cannot tell you. There's a wonderful Scots word, I don't know if there are many Scots in the audience, but there's a wonderful Scots word, thrawn. Thrawn literally means twisted, but in this particular context, thrawn is that instinct that makes you want to do the exact opposite of what a sign is telling you to do. Thrawn is that thing that makes me want to dance down the stairs holding 3 cups of hot coffee every time. Another thing about signs is that, let's see, people don't pay attention to them after a while. I noticed, to come back to consequences, I noticed when Anne was standing here, she asked you all to turn your phones off. And whilst many of you had done that already, a significant number of you hadn't. And being the behavioural scientist that I am, I'd read all the stuff that was coming up on the screen, and one of the things is a sign that says, please turn your phones off. Signs, people don't pay attention to them, it's the consequences. And in this case, the consequences was that Anne said, could you please turn your phone off? And you thought, oh, someone's asked me, that's quite important to them. I'll turn my phone off, and a whole swathe of you did. To come back to the supervisor standing out in the snow, that's the consequence. It's someone saying, oh, this is important to that person personally. Okay, cool, I'll do that, no problem. It's not a big deal. Another thing about signs is, I'm going a bit out on a limb here, but for me, I like to think I care quite a lot about the people at work, but I care even more about the people at home. I care about my family, I care about my kids, I care about my dog, not that he can read, but nevertheless, I care about the people at home, kind of more than I care about the folk at work, especially that so-and-so that annoyed me the other day, that kind of way. But you don't have a sign at home that says hold the handrail. And if signs really worked, you would. you would have signs all over the place because these are the people you care about. If you think a sign is going to keep someone safe, you're going to have them in your house. And you don't. And when you do, there's invariably a note on the fridge that says, please do your chores. And how often do folk pay attention to that? The third thing that doesn't work in preventing injuries are disciplinaries. Attempting to punish someone after something's happened isn't punishment. In fact, in behavioural science, punishment has a very specific meaning. It's something that happens that makes behaviour less likely to occur in the future. And punishment can be just a frown. And you think, okay, I'll take my feet off the table then. Sorry, Auntie Jo. That's your behaviour of putting your feet on the table has been punished, and you never do it again in Auntie Jo's house. Punishing someone in a disciplinary, that's retribution, that's not punishment. It's too late. And what is it that you're trying to achieve when you're punishing someone in a disciplinary? Are you trying to make the future more safe? And if so, really? Is that actually going to achieve that? Who are you punishing? Are you punishing the person that used the drill in this case? Or are you actually punishing all the other people who didn't use the drill? Are you trying to make an example of one person and you end up making everybody else miserable because of it? Is the punishment going to make the injury less likely to occur in the future, any more than just the fact that the man got injured? I'm not sure that it is. And ask yourself, what is it that you're trying to punish? I would suggest that if a disciplinary did take place after an injury like this, you think, well, I want to make sure that this doesn't happen again in the future. But the activity that you maybe think you're trying to punish, which is the act of drilling a hole in a wall with a drill that the person knows they shouldn't be using or knows that is unsafe, I'm not sure that that's the activity you're punishing. I wonder if the activity that you're punishing is getting caught using the drill you're not supposed to be using. And is that going to make things more safe? Are people going to take the message from a disciplinary as, great, my workplace know that I know that my workplace want me to work safely? Or is the message that's going to be taken is, well, I better not get caught when I do work unsafely? And finally, you might find that you're unintentionally punishing the wrong thing. Whilst the man was drilling the hole in the wall, he was doing a whole host of other things that you would want your workforce to do. He was trying to please the customer. He was trying to get the job done quickly. He was trying to make sure he didn't have to make 2 visits to the house and cost people money. God forbid if he'd been on a paid rate that meant that he was going to lose money by coming back on another day himself. Dread to think what would happen in those circumstances, but all of those things, we call them discretionary effort, the things that people do just to please the customer that little bit more, going the extra mile. If you punish this guy for going the extra mile just because he got injured while he was doing his very best to do the job, what's the chances he'll ever do it again? So before I talk about what will make things more safe, I should tell you that all of the things I've just mentioned, signs, emails, to a lesser extent disciplinaries, these are what we call antecedents. And antecedents are an attempt to make a behaviour happen. And we do need antecedents, we do need signs, we do need information telling us what people want us to do and don't want us to do. The trouble is that as a human race, I think we're really strangely unfocused on the fact that antecedents are only about 20% effective at driving people's behaviours. It's all about the consequences. The consequences are 80% effective at driving people's behaviour. And the consequences are dependent on individuals as well. So one person might be very happy to turn their phone off at a sign. Another person might be very happy to turn their phone off because Anne told them to. A third person might think, oh, that Anne, I'm not sure I like her. And they won't turn the phone off for Anne, but they may turn the phone off because the guy next to them digs them in the ribs and says, turn your phone off. Behaviours are individual to everybody. Consequences are individual to everybody. Sometimes you just have to find the right thing. So moving away from what wouldn't have worked, what might have worked? And some of these are not necessarily going to feel hugely intuitive. To bring us back to the intuition that Heinrich triangle might find, that you might find Heinrich triangle counterintuitive, these are also fairly counterintuitive, I hope. Something that might make things more safe for the future are reducing paperwork and reducing bureaucracy. Another thing is creating certainty in the workplace, or reducing uncertainty. And the last thing is setting up the environment for success. So, again, I'm going to deal with these in a little bit more depth. Reducing paperwork and bureaucracy generally. There are terrible downstream impacts to having large amounts of paperwork, and people don't tend to think about them. If your workplace doesn't have a policy of reducing paperwork and bureaucracy, then unfortunately you must conclude that every year on year, they by default have a policy of increasing paperwork and bureaucracy. You have to make a special effort to try and get rid of some of this stuff. And the trouble with paperwork and bureaucracy is that they make us more uncertain, and they're distractions. Between this and creating certainty, I would count them both as a distraction issue. Now, there's a town in Cheshire, some of you might have heard of Poynton in Cheshire. In Poynton, someone very brave persuaded the town council that it would be really good to get rid of all the road markings and all the signs in the town, in just 2 or 3 streets in the middle of the town. So now there's a shared area, pedestrians, bikes, and all road traffic. So cars, lorries, the full works. And they all drive into the middle of town, and suddenly there are no signs and nothing telling them what they're supposed to do. And again, it's slightly counterintuitive, but this has made things more safe. There's now some stats. Love me some stats. In the 3 years prior to introducing the new road policy, there were somewhere between 4 and 7 injuries in Poynton town centre every year. So somewhere between 12 and 21 in the 3 years prior to changing the system. And then they took everything out. They took away anything that might distract people from getting from A to B safely. And in the 3 years since, there has been 1 injury. And that's not all. I love Poynton, it's a brilliant example. There have been knock-on benefits. As with so many small towns, I know living in London, perhaps you don't come across this quite so often, but it's on the news. So many small towns are suffering because of out-of-town shopping malls. And the shops are closing, and the place just feels deserted and tired and a bit sad. There are many towns like me, near me, like that. And Poynton was going that way, but after the new road traffic system was brought in, they noticed an 80% upturn in footfall and in turnover in the shops. And in Poynton, they have a speed limit of 30 miles an hour, and the speed limit hasn't changed. But the average speed people travel through the town centre at is now 20 miles an hour. And that's not all. The average journey time has decreased, even though people are travelling more slowly. So they're now more slow, more safe, with knock-on benefits to the town, and yet they're getting from A to B more quickly. Reducing distractions has knock-on benefits, reducing paperwork has knock-on benefits, and sometimes it's very difficult to do. They had a long consultation period, they had to make very careful recommendations to make sure that people with visual impairments and other disabilities were taken into account when they were bringing this new system in, but it was absolutely worth it. Being pragmatic when you're looking at trying to reduce some paperwork, reduce some distractions, is absolutely worth doing, and making a point of doing it is worth doing it as well. And so Ben Hamilton Bailey was the man behind bringing in the new road system in Poynton, and just like Heinrich, most of the decisions that were made were based on assumptions from the 1930s. And it's not the 1930s anymore. There are new things going on, and we have new ways of doing things and new ways of experimenting with things. And it's really worth trying it sometimes. Another thing that might help is creating some certainty. Too many rules and regulations, voluminous screeds of bits of paper that people have to flick through, lead to people not knowing what they're supposed to do. And so when they need to make a snap decision, they can't. People love certainty, much more than you would appreciate. I travelled on the Underground here today, and I noticed, someone had told me about this already, but I noticed that there are indications telling you how long it will be before your Underground train is going to arrive. As I understand it, when they brought that in, they were actually trying to figure out how to increase customer satisfaction. That was their plan. We want to increase customer satisfaction. They thought, well, we could build shiny new stations, or we could make sure the trains run on time, or we could reduce cancellations. And the solution they came up with, the one that would increase satisfaction the most, is telling people, even if their train's late, telling them how late it's going to be. Increases customer satisfaction, increases certainty, decreases stress, and means that there are fewer distractions. A colleague of mine travelled on an aeroplane recently, and it took off and then almost immediately landed again. And there were no announcements from the cockpit. And the cabin was aflame with gossip. Not actually aflame, that would be very bad, but it was aflame with gossip. And soon, my colleague's a behavioural scientist, and he was listening to everyone going around with great interest, and he soon heard someone down at the back say, "Oh, I saw a rocket launcher, a man with a rocket launcher outside," and the plane had hit a bird. They told them about 10-15 minutes later, but the uncertainty raised the stress levels in the cabin hugely. And when people are stressed, they're distracted, and when they're distracted, they cannot do their jobs safely. And that's all we ever want from people. We want you to turn up and do your job safely. Distractions make everything less safe. And so what you can do is you can create the conditions for success. You can be aware of the power of the environment, of the people who are in the room, and the behaviours of the people who are in the room. If someone walks into the room in a bad mood, you know what happens. Everybody else suddenly starts to feel, even if they were buoyant, they all start to flag a little because one person's in a bad mood. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I just think it's a really interesting thing. If you walk into the room and you're smiley and happy, you might perhaps reduce those stress levels. You get the behaviours that you reinforce. I'm going to talk to you for a little while about near misses. You might remember from the triangle, near misses were the bottom layer. And it seems very popular at the minute for people to want near miss reports. But you might find that you're asking people to say, okay, well, I would like 10 near miss reports this week, please. And then what are you doing? You're actually reinforcing people for filling in a card. But the behaviour I would suggest most people want from near miss reports isn't actually people filling in a card. I think the behaviour that people really want, when they brought in near miss reports as as a concept to begin with, it did have a good intention behind it, and I think that good intention was so that when you saw Bob over there not wearing his goggles, you'd say, "Stop, Bob, hang on for a minute, your goggles are in your chest," and Bob would go, "Oh, thanks very much," and he'd put his goggles on and he would get on with the job safely. If you're reinforcing people for filling in a card, there's less room for them to be saying, "Oh, can you stop for a minute?" And just to go back to the increasing certainty and decreasing paperwork, it means they've got a choice to make. It might seem like a no-brainer as a choice. Do you stop someone doing something unsafe, or do you pull out a bit of paper and fill it in? I was reading earlier today about Deepwater Horizon, the oil rig that very sadly exploded. And yes, it wasn't near misses, but when it came to the crunch, when what they needed to do was evacuate the rig and get everybody off, there were people who didn't really, they had a choice. The manuals said, "We want you to do this except for this and except for that." And they had a life or death choice. And because of everything else that was going on around them, they didn't make the right choice. And that wasn't their fault at all. But it is something worth bearing in mind. If there are a number of choices, people then have to mentally go through that number of choices and make the right choice. If there's only one choice to make, things will be done much more quickly. And it's more likely that you'll get the safe behaviours that you're looking for. And that isn't to say that asking for near-miss reports is bad. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of slides' time. So, something else that you can talk about, something else that you can think about when it comes to creating the conditions for success, setting up the environment so that people will do the safe behaviour, the right behaviour. And when I say people, I mean yourself as well. This isn't about trying to manipulate people into doing what you want them to do. This is about creating the environment where people see the right thing to do as the path of least resistance. And something that's worth being aware of is behavioural scientists call them consequence providers. Consequence providers are the people around us, and they're the ones that make it more or less likely that we will do more of a behaviour in the future or less of a behaviour in the future. Directors' visits, directors' safety visits, I heard them described recently as being like a flock of seagulls. I'll go for the clean version. Being like a flock of seagulls, they descend flapping and squawking and defecate all over everything and disappear again. You might think that a director visiting, especially if you're a director, you might think that because they're very important, that they will have a strong influence on the site when they arrive. And they might turn up and they might say good things. They might turn up and say, "Oh, that's a great job. Well done, thanks very much, that's brilliant." But then they disappear again, and you see them for 10 minutes every year, 10 minutes every 6 months. The people who are actually providing consequences are the ones around you. The person who's most likely to be your main consequence provider is invariably your direct supervisor. It's not always the case, but it usually is. The people around you have the ability to smile and say thank you, or frown and look a little disappointed that something hasn't happened. And if someone whose opinion you value and with whom you have to spend a lot of time is asking you to do something, versus some guy who's just turned up in a suit that you might vaguely know from the picture on the wall, whose influence are you most likely to work under? Being aware of the power that you have on the people around you, and being aware of, in many ways, the little power that you have of the people around you is incredibly important. If you're the person that just turns up for a few minutes and you don't have that relationship, you've got the best will in the world, regardless of how well-intentioned you are, you cannot hope to affect any change on these people. You just can't. You've got 10 minutes versus hours and hours and hours of relationship. And another interesting thing about people is peer pressure. If someone turns up on site, brand new guy, fresh out the wrapper, and they turn up on a construction site at their work, and they're wearing most of their PPE, but they've got their helmet underneath, and they're carrying their helmet, and they step onto site, and they see that everybody else is wearing full PPE, you'll notice, if you watch construction, they'll quietly put the hat on the head. It'll happen in the first few minutes, and suddenly they'll fit in. And they invariably won't even think about it. They'll barely notice it. It's almost subliminal. And the opposite is also true. If someone turns up on site, brand new guy, fresh out the wrapper, full PPE, high-vis jacket, the works, and they turn up and not everybody is looking the same. Not everybody is wearing full PPE. They'll stand out like a sore thumb. And quietly the high-vis jacket will go around the waist and the gloves will get tucked into and soon they'll fit in. And it's really worth being aware of the power of peer pressure. So, I'd like to have a little think about things that you might be able to do yourself. And the first thing is, I really do think it's worth questioning your assumptions. Are you doing things because it's the way they've always been done? Are you putting a sign up on the wall because that's what's expected of you? And if you are, is it worth questioning why that's the case? One of the things about putting signs on the wall is that every time you put a sign on the wall, whether it's you or anybody, every time someone puts a sign on the wall that people don't believe, I think, oh, hold the handrail. Right. I think I can get up and down the stairs myself. You think that perhaps there's no harm in it. What's the harm of putting a sign up? The harm is that the next time you try to ask someone to do something, they're going to think back and say, well, the last 3 things he did weren't worth paying attention to. It's really important to me to make sure that everything you do, even if you think that it's for the best reasons, that everything you do, you check to make sure that it actually is going to make the future more safe. And so, consider trying something new. If the entire point of making things more safe is that you want to improve results, well, if you keep on doing what you're doing just now, regardless of how good it is, you'll keep on getting what you're getting. You can't improve because you're still doing the same things. So even with the best, well, even if you think you're doing brilliantly, and I really hope you all do, sometimes you've got to try something new. But if you do try something new, when you try something new, please be scientific about it. Please measure and figure out if it's having the effect that you hope it's having. And so, some of the things I've mentioned earlier, the signs and the mass emails and the disciplinaries, you might find that if you do one of these things and get some data on whether it's having the effect that you want it to have, you might find that it's working a treat. You might find I'm standing here wasting my time. And if you do, keep on doing it. Please do. If you find that something you're doing is making things more safe, please stick at it. But if you find that something you're doing isn't making things more safe, you have to stop doing it. You have to do what we call failing fast. Stop doing it, find something else, try something new. Because if you're not making the future more safe, you're making it less safe. And if you don't test for something, you'll never know. You have to gather the data. So I can't tell you how excited I was to see that there were feedback forms here. And I'm going to be asking if I can see the feedback, because I'll never know how good or bad my talking skills are until I read your feedback. So yeah, behavioural scientists love data, we love feedback. It helps us make things better. And the last thing I think is worth doing is seeing if you can bring out the best in people. People really want to do a good job. Workers generally want to do a good job. And directors want to do a good job as well. The directors want workers to do a good job. So CEO level, they want their workers to do a cracking job. But somehow, somewhere in the middle, there's a disconnect happening every now and again. One example of this is when a middle management team somewhere decides that because someone burnt themselves in a cup of coffee, that everybody has to wear lids. They have to put lids on their coffee as they walk through the office. And you think, well, that seems like a perfectly reasonable idea. Why not? As long as they provide the lids, why not? What harm can it do? Now, I'll bring you back to the throne. You know what I want to be doing with lids. But the trouble is, it's that same management team that then make decisions down the line that say, well, Joe Bloggs down there, he asked if he could have a new pair of gloves, a slightly more expensive pair of gloves, because they were going to be better quality, a slightly better PPE, that sort of thing. I think, oh, well, I can't afford that. And the directors want people to work safely, and the workers want to work safely, because everyone wants to go home safely. But somewhere in middle management, they're making decisions that change safety policy from something that's easy to police, relatively cheap to do, like putting lids on coffee cups, and you can point at someone and say, you're not doing that, to refusing people things at different levels to them that might make things more safe. And that's where the disconnect has occurred, I would suggest. Certainly in some of the workplaces I've been in. And so it's all about setting up the environment so that you're giving people the best possible chance of doing their job right. And by doing their job right, I mean doing their job safely. And if you can figure out where all those disconnects are, and you can think about all the unintended downstream impacts of little decisions that are being made, I think it's fairly likely that we'll all be able to make the future much more safe for everyone. So, if you liked my talk, my organisation and the wider federation around us, we have a conference coming up in November. We run this conference every year, safety conference in November. It's BMT stands for Behavioural Management Techniques, so it's very much focused on the behavioural science. It's in Manchester. We have a workshop the day before, which is Wednesday the 19th, and then the conference is on Thursday the 20th. And we'll be talking about a lot of the things I've mentioned already. We'll be talking about directors' tours, we'll be talking about near misses, and we'll be talking about Target Zero, a favourite of mine, which I won't go into just now. And if you'd like to get in touch with me, that's my website, that's my email address. I'd love to hear from you. I wonder if you have any questions or if I want to take